Hello, everyone. My name is Nancy Nave, and I am the director of Spencer Main Street, and I also participate in the Spencer Historic Preservation Commission that meets once a month, and this is something that we started a few years ago with our lecture series, and we thought it was so great that we've continued it. We wouldn't be able to do it without the great brains of people like Eric Johnson who are presenting tonight. It's so nice to see so many of you here tonight. We will have a question and answer period after Eric is done presenting. Just raise your hand and we'll run around with a microphone so that folks at home that are watching on Facebook and later on in SMU can hear it too. The restrooms are just out this door, down the hall, and then to your left again if you do need to go to the bathroom. And we're going to get kicked off right now with Eric Johnson talking about the history of E.P. Arnold, who was a true visionary on how he started his business back in 1927. Eric wrote a book about it, which you probably all know. He's a great speaker, great preacher too. So we are so pleased to have Eric Johnson with us tonight. Thank you, Eric.
Yeah, thanks, Nancy. So my intent is to use the wireless mic. Is that going to work for everybody? Can you all hear me okay? Because I can't stand still long enough to stay by that. So I will jump in. The whole idea, behind historic preservation and Arnold Motor Supply, I wanted to kind of weave the two things together and hopefully present a little bit about the history of the company, which I can talk about for hours, but embedded into a little bit about the community and what was going on in the community at the time when the business was started, what kind of, because I studied economics, and so I'm really always interested in things like infrastructure and transportation and what products were coming in and how were they getting here and why is the city shaped the way it's shaped. So all of those things kind of go into all of this. So just to kind of paint a picture and give you a background, you probably are familiar with some of these dates, but the city of Spencer was filed, the plat was filed, and it was named county seat in 1871. In 1878, the Chicago, Milwaukee, and St. Paul Railway gets to town, and that's when things really start to change. At that point, the rail was the thing that drove the economy. There were no paved roads. In fact, there were very few graveled roads at this point. So things, you weren't transporting things via vehicles. Anything that was getting here was having to come here, and anything that was leaving here was having to leave here by rail. And so that is a big event in 1878 when the railway arrives. In 1899, EP is born. So EP is born kind of into this environment where, the community is new. The rail has just been here for 20 years, and things are just kind of starting to expand. The year after he's born, a second railway comes to town, which is another big event. And in 1927 is when he opened the business. And so we'll start kind of at this early beginning and talk a little bit about what Spencer looked like. So this is a picture of the Chicago, Milwaukee, and St. Paul Rail Depot, which was, obviously just looking at the number of people there, it was a big thing. This is really what started the economy of Spencer moving. As Mr. Arnold was buying parts at the beginning, most of the things he was buying would have been coming in via rail. So completely different than what we're used to thinking of today. But this is why a lot of the businesses were consolidated around the rail depot, because anything, again, that was coming in this way. This is what that spot looks like now, so you kind of get an idea of where that depot was. Northwest Bank is now sitting on that spot. And, obviously there's not a lot of people standing there because we don't all hang out waiting for the train anymore. This is the second railway. So this is the Minneapolis and St. Louis rail bridge. So this was taken standing on East Leach Park and looking north across the river. This is that same bridge standing on the other side of the river looking back south to East Leach Park. And this was another big development. When this came through, everyone was super excited because this was supposed to be the line that connected Minneapolis and Omaha. And we were right in the middle of that, and that was going to be a big economic boon for the city. Unfortunately, it never happened. The rail never made it farther than Storm Lake. And so that just kind of fizzled. And in fact, this railway was gone within 30 years. So this bridge was only in place for 36 years. All that's left today, if you go hanging around on East Leach, there is a little piece of cement down there, and you can still see the little bit remnants of that railway bridge. And of course, the tracks that run through Shines today, those were part of that original Minneapolis and St. Louis Railway. This is part of the reason why that railway failed. This is the trestle bridge down in Sioux Rapids. This bridge only lasted 36 years, but it actually had to be rebuilt once halfway through. So imagine spending all the money and effort to build this bridge and it lasts 16 years, and you got to rebuild it again. And this was part of the struggles that this railway was facing. This is the depot on that railway. So we saw the other depot, which we're kind of all familiar with. This is the Minneapolis and St. Louis depot, which is over on the east side of town. And again, anything that Mr. Arnold would have been bringing in had to have come in on one of those two trains initially. So this is now this. The depot is long gone. Those tracks go nowhere. But you know, you can kind of picture, if you think about it, what it would have been like in that time span from 1900, where the Minneapolis and St. Louis went in, until 1936 when it disappeared. Interestingly, and we'll talk about it a little bit later, Mr. Arnold had a big role in the railway and was doing a lot of advocating at the government level for railways. And again, because of so much of what he did relied on the rail service to the city. So that just kind of paints a little background of rail. Again, keeping in mind that we're starting a business. I say we, like we, and there are a lot of Arnold people here tonight. Thank you for being here. But, you know, we think of us as us. You know, even though none of us were alive back then, we were starting this business that was in this automotive industry at a time when there wasn't yet a paved road to Spencer, and rail was king. But E.P. Arnold could see that this is the next thing. This is the coming thing, and so he recognized the potential in this. And I think that's why I'm trying to paint a little bit of this background picture before we really get into what Mr. Arnold was doing. So here's some interesting things just relative to Spencer. The Thomas Manufacturing Company. So Walt Thomas invented something that we would all be familiar with today called a gas pedal. Believe it or not, that was an accessory that you could buy back then. So we had a manufacturing plant here in Spencer that was manufacturing the Bulldog foot feed, which was the name for the gas pedal, because the car didn't come with one. When you bought it, the car came with a throttle up here by the steering wheel, which you couldn't have a free hand, so it was really a cool thing to be able to control, feed gas to the engine with your foot and use the foot feed. So that was being manufactured here in Spencer and is indicative of the kind of thing that a lot of these automotive industry type businesses that were springing up were selling or making. This also is no longer here and is now a giant piece of gravel in this parking lot kind of back behind, across the street from Hy-Vee. That's where the gas pedal got its start. So now we're moving into the 20s. So that, I think, gives you a really good picture. So at this point, E.P. Arnold is 23 years old, and he got married, and it made the newspaper. And so it's listed, tells us that he was a bookkeeper for Schoenemann Lumber Company, a name that we would recognize. And as a bookkeeper for Schoenemann Lumber Company, he was only there for about 6 months. You'll notice here he was a bookkeeper there in the winter and spring months, and he made many friends during the 6 months he was in the city. So the Schoenemann Lumber Company was, this is the building. Now this picture was taken later. This picture was taken after the fire, but I'll put this in context for you here. Also pay attention to the little building in the bottom right-hand corner, which is still here today, and plays into the Arnold Motor Supply story here in a little bit. But the main thing we're looking at here is the Schoenemann Brothers building, where Mr. Arnold worked for about 6 months. And today, that is this. empty lot. Notice a trend here. Everywhere EP Arnold goes, it falls apart and becomes a parking lot. So this was the Schoenman Brothers Lumber Company in the 20s, and that's where EP was working, kind of the first job that he had in Spencer. Now his brother was the manager of another lumber yard, so he kind of had this lumber, at least he had some knowledge about business and lumber. But it's interesting too, as we go through this, the different jobs that he had. So now we have a 1922 newspaper article saying that he is now moving to Rembrandt, and he is going to manage the Lane Moore Company. The Lane Moore Company is a lumber yard in Rembrandt. Now Rembrandt is on that Minneapolis and St. Louis Railway, the one we talked about earlier. So in 1922, that railway is still going strong. Everything still is looking good. They're still optimistic that they're going to have enough money to be able to raise the capital to finish that line all the way down to Omaha. So this is a growing town. Everybody thinks that Rembrandt is going to be one of these towns that takes off. You look at Greenville. The only reason Greenville exists is because of this railway. You go north, that's where Langdon came from. They would put these towns with the water stops for the steam trains about every 12 miles. So coincidentally, as you drive east and west on Highway 18, you've got Dickens, and then you go to Ruthven, and then you go to Emmitsburg, and it's about 12 miles. Same thing going west. And that's where most of the communities in Spencer came from as a result of rail. Two reasons: you had to have water fairly frequently, and the farmers on dirt roads couldn't take products very far, so you had to have about every 10 miles a stop so that farmers could get their produce to market. So here's EP moving down to the growing metropolis of Rembrandt, ready to manage this new lumber yard. This is the lumber yard that he was managing, and I can't show you a picture of that today because it doesn't exist, but that was the big thing in 1922. So now you notice that in a very short period of time, Mr. Arnold has moved multiple times, has multiple jobs, and now here in 1924 he's moving back to Spencer. First thing is William Wendt and Ralph Poole. They're opening a automotive business selling tires and autos in the Poole building, which is now approaching completion on Main Street. We'll talk about the Poole building here in a little bit. So Mr. Poole moved into the apartments upstairs, and EP Arnold moved into his house and rented his house from him. And so Mr. Poole is in the automotive business, living upstairs above his business, and Mr. Arnold is renting his house while he's now left the lumberyard and he's working for the Dixon Fruit Company. So he's working here in Spencer for the Dixon Fruit Company in 1924. And this is a Sanborn map. So these Sanborn maps are really useful if you're doing historical research. This is showing you the blue building on here is the wholesale fruit, the Dixon Fruit Company. So Mr. Arnold worked here for a couple months. So you see a trend here. If I was at this point getting a resume for EP Arnold, I would be looking at it and thinking, there's some red flags on this resume. This guy can't stick anywhere. So he only worked there for a couple months, and then he moved across the alley into the Spencer Grocery. So he's now had, I think, 5 or 6 jobs, and he doesn't seem to be able to stick anywhere. He's worked in lumber, he's worked in wholesale fruit and grocery, really no connection there at all. Now today, so if you go back and look, you see the rail spur is coming down. That's actually First Avenue East. So it's interesting to note that the rail is coming down First Avenue East. This is that same view today overhead. You can still see the remnants of the rail that's been gone for I don't know how long. But the building that he was in first is this building, which today has Spencer Convenient Healthcare in it. And then across the alley, of course, is the Spencer Grocer Company, which today is the Spencer Community Theater. So notice that there is a boxcar in front of Spencer Community Theater, and there's that big cement loading dock, which today is when you walk up through the old entrance. That's where they used to unload the boxcars for the grocer wholesale company. So Mr. Arnold worked here for a couple of years, and this is where he really learned a lot of the business. So of course, this is what it looks like today thanks to Google Earth, Google Maps, which is a great resource for cheating and not having to run around and take a bunch of pictures. So during this time, here's another advertisement that shows up in the newspaper. A gentleman named B.J. Lewis from New Hampton, Iowa, who has been struggling to make it in the automotive industry. He has ran a machine shop. He has sold tires for B.F. Goodrich, and he's really not had much success. In fact, he finally declared bankruptcy off of his machine shop and just couldn't make it, but was able to, he owned the building. So at least he was able to sell the building, get some cash from that, which gave him the opportunity to move to Spencer and try something else. So it tells us that he is opening an automobile accessory agency in the Wirtz building on 4th and Mill. So that is that little building that I pointed out down in the corner where today you cannot buy auto accessories, but you can get a tattoo. So this is where our business really kind of starts. B.J. Lewis is running his auto accessory business. I'm sure he's selling bulldog foot feeds and all kinds of other cool accessories for automotive. In one of these two, I don't know whether it's the left or the right storefront, and we discover that he is really good mechanically. He's very good at doing the installations of things, but he's very poor business-wise. E.P. Arnold is a bookkeeper who is doing accounting for all of these businesses, and he does accounting at night because accounting is so fun. That's our chief financial officer back in the corner. So he's doing accounting for B.J. Lewis. He starts going through this box of receipts, which is not the way you're supposed to do it, right? That's not the way you're supposed to, yeah. And he discovers, you know what? There is profit to be made in this. We just need to get him organized. So B.J. Lewis has all of the expertise in the automotive world. He's very mechanically inclined. He's worked in this space for 15, 16 years. Didn't have the business savvy really to make it successful, but knew the market, knew the customers. Mr. Arnold has been doing the business side of things since his very first job out of the Army. He was in the Army for World War I, never served overseas. The war ended before he was shipped over, so he went straight into business. So the two were really a good connection for each other. And then that takes us to this newspaper article, which came out in August of 1927, telling us that we are going to start a business called Arnold and Lewis. It's going to occupy the Olson building across the street from the Tangney Hotel. And Mr. Arnold has been working for the Spencer Grocer Company. So this is now kind of what we would consider the beginning of Arnold Motor Supply. This is Mr. Arnold inside that first store. So he is now, they have actually gone to the gentleman who owned this building, a gentleman named Peter Ostrom, and asked him to build onto the back of the building so that they can put the machine shop back there and then store all of the products up in the front. So the way they worked this out was they married the machine shop with the parts sales, which we still do today. And Mr. Arnold handled the customer-facing part up front. Mr. Lewis handled the machining in the back. And that relationship instantly took off. The other thing that they did that was unique, I don't have a picture of it. Shame on me. I should have. I keep doing that. They purchased a 1927 Chevrolet Roadster, built a box on the back, and instead of having the customers come to them, they brought the parts to the customers. That, again, is something that sets us apart today we rest on the philosophy of we will provide better service, we will get it to you, you don't bother coming, we'll get it there for you. So from the beginning, this is kind of the DNA of the company. It's combining selling the parts with doing the machine shop and what they called Minuteman delivery service, which was their phrase way back then to define the fact that how we're setting ourselves apart from everybody else is our service. So that gets us through the 20s. So at this point, they are now really getting their feet under them. Mr. Arnold obviously has hopped from job to job to job, from industry to industry, and now he's finding his place. B.J. Lewis has struggled and struggled and struggled, and now has kind of found this recipe for how to be successful. And so the next thing they do is they buy a struggling company in Waterloo that is going bankrupt, and they acquire the business, negotiate with the creditors, and they take over that business, and it becomes Lewis Motor Supply. So Lewis Motor Supply is now operating in Waterloo and is successful right out of the gate because they're taking this blueprint and applying it now over there. That looks like it's working well, so Mr. Arnold goes up to Marshall, Minnesota. He has a friend who has done a lot of accounting in the region, and Schwann's Ice Cream is up there and is really starting to take off. I personally would want to open a facility close to Schwann's Ice Cream, so I can completely get Mr. Arnold's logic here. So he starts a Arnold Motor Supply in Marshall, Minnesota. So technically, the first Arnold Motor Supply is in Marshall, Minnesota, because this building here is still called Arnold and Lewis. So we are now in the spot where we're rolling into the 30s. So we are, during the 30s, we as a company are adding stores in Marshall, Minnesota, Sheldon, Algona, and Mason City. The Spencer Fire, of course, happens in 1931. Highway 71 and 18 are being paved. The Minneapolis and St. Louis Railroad is abandoned. So now all of that excitement about the economic boon, about being the hub between Minneapolis and Omaha, gone. Merrill Arnold is born, and EP and Irene build their dream home. So we'll talk through some of those things here. So this is a picture taken on June 27th, 1931, of the very beginnings of the Spencer Fire. Now to back up a little bit, let's back up one day to June 26th, 1931, which was a Friday. Mr. Arnold and Mr. Lewis decided that the two separate ventures, Arnold Motor Supply in Marshall and Lewis Motor Supply in Waterloo, were going very successfully, and they decided that they were going to separate their entities. Mr. Lewis was going to go east and focus on Waterloo, and Mr. Arnold would stay here in the west and focus on Arnold Motor Supply in Marshall and in Spencer. So they signed the paperwork to dissolve the partnership. Mr. Arnold buys out Mr. Lewis on Friday, June 26th. He now owns the entire business. And the next day, he loses the entire thing in the Spencer Fire. So day one of him owning this business, he loses the whole thing. You'll see in the picture here, there's the Arnold and Lewis building. It is the last building destroyed in the fire. If you're familiar with the story of the fire, they flew dynamite up from Des Moines, and they blew up the dry cleaning business, which was right here, which ultimately is what stopped the fire from rolling into one of our big customers, the Dixon Auto Electric, which was right next door. And today that is a hearing place. This building, this is the Pool building, where Ralph Poole opened that auto accessory business. It had already failed by here, so now his wife had a dress shop there. So that's going to be our next move, is we're going to go from auto parts into dresses. Does that sound like a good plan? No, we will not be doing that. So obviously today that is Pizza Ranch. And then next door there, that would have been, I don't know exactly when Escher Motor went in there. It wasn't there then, but it was automotive. It was something else automotive at the time. So a lot of automotive stuff going on in that part of Main Street at the time that we are in this business. Here's another shot of Arnold and Lewis as just as the dynamite has been let go in the dry cleaners, and you can just kind of see the chaos and the status of the building, the business. So he lost everything. Now, fortunately, the fire was slow enough coming up Main Street that he was able to get there and at least get his stuff out of the safe. So he had all of his records, he had all of his payables, his receivables, all of those kind of things, but all of the merchandise was lost. So now he needs to find a place. He and everyone else who had businesses on Main Street have to find a place to conduct business. Most everyone who lost everything in the fire was back up and running very quickly in temporary sheds, all kinds of different places. The resilience and the flexibility of these people is amazing. When you think about what would it take today to be back in business 48 hours after something this catastrophic. It's really amazing what they were able to accomplish. This is where Mr. Arnold went. It's the Lowe and Erickson dealership, which was just north, far enough that it was spared from the fire. So he set up a card table in the corner and was able to at least conduct business from here. These were a customer of his, and he was a friend of Mr. Lowe. So this building, I think you're kind of starting to figure out where this is potentially. Today, that is Sherwin-Williams. So the Sherwin-Williams building had a gas station out in front, and Mr. Arnold set up a temporary folding table in the corner and at least was able to conduct business. Interestingly, and maybe ironically, when he was there, he was fascinated at the paint that they were able to do in the garage and the technology that they were using to match paint. And so this is where the beginnings of us, and today we are the largest PPG retailer in the Midwest, came from here, from Sherwin-Williams. So we thank them for that. So this is where he was working during those months when the building is gone. We have no home. Amazingly, by July 23rd, so we're talking less than a month after the fire, here's a picture that we have an artist rendering of what the new building is going to look like. And this is appearing in the newspaper all over. All these different plans of what's going to be rebuilt is coming out. I mean, can you imagine having an architect drawing within 3 weeks of losing your building? It doesn't happen today. So now we're in September. Mr. Arnold is open for business in his old location in a new and attractive brick structure built by Peter Ostrom. The entire stock is not in place yet, but you get the idea. So by September, so think about that. The entirety of downtown Spencer is burned in June, and by the end of September, we're back open in the same place. That's impossible today. It's amazing to me that they were able to do this. This is a picture taken in October 22nd of 1931. So you'll see the Arnold Motor Supply building right here. It's the farthest left building. And there's still construction going on this block, and there's a lot of construction going on downtown. But it's just fascinating to me that they were able to rebound so quickly. So today, this is the building that Arnold Motor Supply was in, the Aris Electrolux building. So that was the building rebuilt in 31 after the fire. Now that takes us into the mid-30s, and this is where things are really starting to transition. So what's going on in the 30s besides Spencer Fire? Great Depression. I didn't point it out earlier, but on that slide that we had of the Walt Thomas Company, the other little article that was in that same screen capture was talking about a bank failing. That was going on here long before the Depression started. The 20s was really, we hear about the roaring 20s. They weren't roaring here. It was a rough time here. And there's a lot of turmoil that's starting to happen as you move into the mid-30s in the transportation space, which is why we talked about all the railroad things early in the presentation. And so in 1934, kind of in the midst of the Depression, in the midst of rail is starting to maybe lose ground to trucks, and there's a lot of turmoil within government and within the economy as far as what's going to happen with rail, what's going to happen with transportation. And there were actually several hearings going on in 1934, and Mr. Arnold was very active in those hearings. And this is one spot where, as I look back at all the information that's available about E.P. Arnold, I just agree with almost everything that he did. And you look at how forward-thinking he was and how he made so many good decisions. Yet at this point, he's actively involved against truckload transportation or against less than truckload transportation and really lobbying hard in favor of the railroads. And this is where I really don't understand his thinking. It would appear that as forward-thinking and progressive as he was, he would recognize that there's a lot of opportunity to be gained from the increase of freight being transported via truck. But he was very active fighting against allowing trucks to come in with hauling freight and to help protect the railroads. I have to assume that the main reason for this, and it kind of bears it out as you read through the conversation of the time, was the local merchants were very concerned about the competition that would arise as people from maybe the larger cities around of Sioux City or Fort Dodge could more easily bring products into the smaller communities. And I have to assume that he was very concerned about that. Now, in today's world, we view trucks as one of our biggest source of business. They're very good customers of ours, and selling parts for trucks. Now, obviously, we were not in the business of supplying parts for trains, so I don't. It seems strange to me that he took the stance that he did. But given his track record, I'm certainly not. And hindsight is 20/20, so I'm not criticizing his thought process. But I just don't understand it at this point. So we did start to see a big transition here in the mid-30s, and ultimately, you remember the Minneapolis and St. Louis Railway that we talked about. That those tracks that went from Spencer to Storm Lake ultimately are abandoned and torn up in 1936 as the transition to truck really took hold, which really is all a part of, we now have paved roads. Everything is so much easier to be transported via truck, so much more economical. And so that was a significant shift in how products were being delivered to small communities, our products, the automotive parts, plus everything else. So, as we move through the 30s, we are now established as a pretty successful company. We have 5 stores as we get to 1938. And so we, as a company, have outgrown the original facility, the one that we've seen that was rebuilt after the fire. And so in 1938, a new building was built specifically for our business, and we had 20 employees at that point. So we have a picture of the entire company. I'm told this is everyone that worked for the company except for one person. I don't know if that one person was the photographer or what the story is behind the one. But the reason I know so much about this photo and so much about the early history of the company was because of Florence Rush, who is pictured right here in the middle of the picture. And she was an amazing woman that I'm sure many people in the area will remember. And she really was able to give me a lot of good information, a lot of really good insight from the inside. She was Mr. Arnold's first employee. And so to be able to listen to her talk about the fire and talk about this building has been was very interesting, and I'm super glad that I got the chance to know her and talk with her. So, continuing the trend of empty lots, the building that we moved into in 1938 and occupied for 20 years, that lasted until the 90s, and it, I believe, was destroyed by a fire in the year 2000 and is no longer there. So from where we're standing right here, it was just diagonally across the street, and that's where the building, or that's where the business was from 1938 until the late 50s. So at the same time that the company was moving into this new building, Mr. Arnold himself was also very successful. He had made a good amount of money from the 5 stores. And so he and Irene built, I guess, what you would call their dream house. So they built a really beautiful English Tudor home. And there was a lot of newspaper coverage about the house because of all of the technology. It was cutting edge for 1938. And in terms of the placement of the house, Mr. Arnold's son Merrill, for whom the Merrill Company is named, was legally blind. He could see enough to do things. He actually farmed later in life, but he was legally blind, and so they had some concerns about him safely walking to school. And one thing that they were able to do is they purchased a lot right across the street from Lincoln School and built this house, which they lived in for 20-ish years and ultimately sold to Milt Warner, who turned it into Warner Funeral Home. So that moves us into the 1940s. Of course, the 1940s is, in the big picture, is known primarily for World War II. During the 1940s, even in the midst of the turmoil of the war, we added 3 stores. So we went into Fairmont, Minnesota, plus stores in Boone and Carroll and Olwine. So the war is a really interesting time period in which there's a lot of upheaval in terms of the economy, in terms of the culture here in the Midwest. And we have this letter that is a really interesting snapshot to me of who Mr. Arnold was. So I'm going to read some little pieces from this letter, and it really gives you some insight into who he was as a person and why he was such a good leader. So the letter starts off, and he wrote this, my understanding is, to each of the individual store managers. And he says, I want to come into your home and talk with you about your job and my job in this business of distributing automobile parts. And then he goes on and he talks about, during the past few weeks when I attend committee meetings or meet with any group of men, I continually hear good and sensible men make the statement that there is nothing left for us in Iowa and Minnesota, and that we all will be out of business. You keep reading, and he talks about that we really need to do some hard thinking. We need to be sane in our thinking, and we certainly must not become panicky. He goes on to say that, and this is one of my favorite parts because he really focuses on what I think is the main argument of why he thought they would be successful. And he says this: we live in small towns and agricultural districts. People will say that we have no defense plants. I say we have thousands of defense plants and that we live in the center of it all. Our defense plants are the thousands of farms producing food for the war, the most essential item of all. And then he goes on to talk about the farmer and what farmers' purchasing habits would be looking like. And then he lists 5 points as to why he thinks that their business was going to be solid. The first one, he talks about the price of each part would probably be 30% higher. No different than today that, inflation pushes up the cost of parts. And so ultimately, any business is selling something for a higher margin than what they purchased it for and make extra margin during an inflationary period. The second thing he says is that the closest competitor that we had for parts has always been car factories, and that now car factories were really starting to pull a lot of their people off the road and would be less, their people being salespeople, would be less visible in the market, so there would be less competition from them. His third point is that there were other small parts stores, jobbers, that were in the area. And he said the smaller jobbers are either going to fail completely or at least take their men off the road and discontinue the use of delivery trucks. So again, that we were going to see less competition. His fourth point was that statistics show for the years that the first year that a car's on the road, we practically get no business from it. The second year, we start to sell some parts for it. The third and fourth years, we reach the peak amount of parts used on that car. And in the fifth year, then it starts to tail off, and finally the car is dropped from the list. What's amazing to me is we use that exact same logic today. We have what we call the sweet spot for aftermarket or repair parts. And now obviously cars are lasting way longer than 5 years today. The average car on the road is about 12 years old, but the logic is the same. And so we do this exact same thing. So he then goes on to list them the specifics. He said in the 1942 peak year cars will be the 38 and 39 models, and that all of the records show that there were so many more 38 and 39 vehicles sold than were 35 and 36, that if 42 was a normal year, the parts business would naturally increase by 25%. So in other words, he's saying there's so many more vehicles on the road, even though we're driving less, it's going to be offset by the fact that there are so many more vehicles out there. And then the last thing he says is this will be the best year ever to sell tractor parts. And again, going back to the reliance on agriculture in this industry. So he does a great job of, I guess, calming the fears of his people, giving them a reason to be confident. And at the end he says, remember, the farmer is our final customer. If there was ever a time when the farmer was making money, it's now. You're living in the best spot in the world. Get busy and generate a greater percent of the total business to be had. Do some real sane thinking and don't let these rumors get you down. And I just love that letter because it paints such a great picture of Mr. Arnold as a person and as a leader. So he navigated us through the war years, and as we moved into the 1950s, we added a store in Marshalltown. So at that point, we had 10 stores, and so we had again outgrown our home, and now we begin to see a trend of Mr. Arnold buying real estate. So he's no longer renting anything. Up until here, he had rented all of the stores that he was in, and now he begins a real estate project, so he's now wanting to own all of the land and all the buildings. So the first thing that he did was he built a new headquarters in Spencer, which any Spencer native will recognize as this was the original Arnold Motor Supply store, where the store was downstairs with all the glass windows across the front. And then in the back was the machine shop behind the store. And then farther back was garages for the delivery vehicles. And upstairs was the corporate office. Mr. Arnold's office was the corner office up that we're looking at in the photo. And then if you go inside the building, you can really kind of get a sense of Mr. Arnold from a marketing perspective, him coming from the grocery business. He was, probably bigger on product presentation and the atmosphere of the store than most of his competitors. And in fact, he talks about how he really wanted to get the parts business kind of out of dark and dirty, greasy facilities and into something that's a little more appealing. So you get a sense looking here in this picture as he's behind the counter helping some customers that this was much nicer and a different type of environment than people were used to running into a parts store in the 1950s. So that takes us into the 1960s, and there's a couple developments that happened in the 60s, the first of which is, at that point, we had 10 stores in 1960, and so it started to make sense to build our own warehouse, which ultimately became the Merrill Company. We also, in the 60s, added stores in Oskaloosa, Storm Lake, Ames, and Nevada. So in 1960 is when the warehouse was built. And so we have a photo of the original Arnold Motor Supply warehouse. And I point that out that the name of it at that point was the Arnold Motor Supply warehouse because the Merrill Company did not yet exist. So in the photo, we have Junior Landis, who was involved in the warehouse part of the operation, EP Arnold, and Gib Pullen, who also was helped with the warehouse part of the operation as they built the Merrill Company. So the way the company today is actually two companies from the perspective of the IRS. We are our Arnold Motor Supply and the Merrill Company. It's two separate limited liability partnerships. The second partnership, the Merrill Company, was formed in 1963. The reason that we did that at the time, there in the early 60s, the federal government was being a little more aggressive in looking at antitrust type issues, and there was a lawsuit in California against a company that was structured very much like us, where they got into some trouble for having their own warehouse and then selling to themselves, essentially. So the company decided that it was in the best interest to split into two different companies in order to avoid antitrust concerns and the Federal Trade Commission. So that was done in 1963. So we operated as two separate entities. Now today, we still are legally two separate entities, but there really is no distinction between the two. If you were to walk down the halls of the Merrill Company, you would maybe see people in next door office to each other. One's working for Arnold Motor Supply, the other's working for the Merrill Company. And unless I go look, I don't even know the difference between who is where. Now, technically, I am part of both partnerships simply because that's the way the structure is as the managing partner. That's just the way it works, but everybody else is part of one or the other. But again, we really operate as one entity. We do, within accounting, we level out all the profits so that everybody is getting the same return on investment as the partners and all those things. But it's simpler just to leave it as two separate companies than to try and put it all back together. So those were the big things that happened in the 60s. And then we roll into the 70s. In the 70s, we added stores in Fort Dodge, Ankeny, Fairfield, Washington, and Lamar's. Now, the Lamar's store was actually the last one added. It's the 19th store, and it was added after Mr. Arnold had passed away. Unfortunately, Mr. Arnold passed away in 1978. At the time of his passing, we had 18 stores, and so Worthington, Minnesota was the last store that was added during his lifetime. So he passed away in 78. Unfortunately, his son Merrill passed away the same year, and so there were no close family ties then after that. So, from the 70s, we take a giant leap forward to today. Today, we have 77 locations spread across 5 states. From the 20 people that you saw in the photo in 1938, we now have basically 900. And I believe we are the 12th or 13th largest distributor of automotive products in the United States. So, it's really a testament to Mr. Arnold and the foundation of the company. I'm thankful for the culture that he created and the company that he built. So Merrill Arnold, who, Mr. Arnold's son, was also not involved in the business at all, and he was a farmer. So as you head south down Highway 71, Silo City, all the silos on the left, that is the Arnold farm. And Merrill lived there until he became ill and had to move off the farm in 77, I think, and then he passed away in 78. Was he ever married? No. Nope. So there are no surviving Arnold heirs. The company was passed over to a gentleman named Gar Oder, who Mr. Arnold kind of handpicked as his successor. And the two worked side by side for 9 years. So Gar was the managing partner for 9 years while EP was still alive, and kind of slowly stepping back from the company. Yes.
Would you explain the ownership of the company right now?
Yeah, sure. So the ownership is interesting. When it first started, it was a partnership. Then it became a corporation. Mr. Arnold actually had a meeting with J.C. Penney here in Spencer, and J.C. Penney was a big proponent.
I know, this is so inappropriate, I'm sorry. There you go.
Is it fixed?
Now we're good.
Okay. We're good. This happens to me all the time. So we were a partnership, then we were a corporation. J.C. Penney played a big part in that. So Mr. Arnold formed it as a partnership then from through the 40s, 50s, and into the 60s. In the 60s, we started running into some issues with labor negotiations, unions, and rather than, he was adamant that he did not want a union because he was so big on dealing with people individually. The idea of collective bargaining was he just hated the thought. And so he wanted to deal with everybody as an individual, and so he said, I'm just going to make them all a partner. So he opened up the partnership to everyone. If they couldn't pay, he would loan them the money. So the entrance to be a partner was a $500 investment because that's what Mr. Arnold had in 1927 to start it. Today, the entrance to be a partner is still $500 to pay homage to Mr. Arnold. So in 1966, everyone in the company became a partner. You had to be a partner. So you get hired to work for Arnold Motor Supply, we ask you to write out a check for $500 to come work for us because you're now a partner. That worked great until about 1997 when we started seeing companies like AutoZone, Advance, O'Reilly. So now they're open on Sunday, they're open at night, they're heavy into retail. And so we think in order to compete, we're going to have to become that. We're going to have to go full retail, and so we're going to have people working at nights and on Sundays and hire part-time people. And good luck hiring a part-time person and telling them, you're going to work part-time on Sundays, but we need $500 for the privilege of doing it. Doesn't work. So now we split it back out and say, okay, there's still going to be a partnership, but we'll have a mix of partners and employees. And today, that's still the way the structure works. So in really rough numbers, of the 900 people that work there, 200-ish are partners. So the company is the two companies. You really can't tell the difference anymore between our Motor Supply and the Merrill Company. And so you walk down the hall, there might be someone in one office who is an Arnold Motor Supply employee, and on the next office is a Merrill Company employee, and there is no difference. At the end of the year, all the money gets merged together into a pool. Is that the technical term, merged together? Yeah. And then, so everybody's return is the same, all of that kind of stuff. But we are two companies in name only with the IRS, but functionally we're all one. I guess technically I'm employed by both because I'm the managing partner, which is in our term the same as a CEO, but because the way the thing is written, I have to be in both partnerships. Everybody else is in one or the other, but you really can't tell who's who. Any other questions?
Yeah, I just want to go back to the beginning a little bit when we were talking about getting parts here initially. Do we know how the parts were ordered back then?
Yeah. So we know a couple things about the way parts were ordered, and there's not a lot of good records on this, unfortunately. So we do know that rail was heavily involved. We know that it was typically a couple weeks for things to show up. We also know that back early on, Mr. Arnold was a little creative with his ordering, and so what he would do is he didn't have cash. He couldn't generate cash flow fast enough. So he would get a bill from Perfect Circle piston rings, and he'd get a bill from, fill in the blank, I don't know who the vendors were back then, Cloy's gears. And so he would send the Perfect Circle check to Cloy's, and he would send the Cloy's check to Perfect Circle, and then apologize to both for the bookkeeping error because he didn't have cash and they would have bounced the check. So that gave him time to get cash in the bank so that he could, we don't do that today. But I mean, it was some interesting stories that you hear from the beginning. But yeah, it was totally, today everything is so built on speed, which means you have your car on the lift, you need the part now. So our job, I kind of joke, it's like Jimmy John's, except you can't eat what we're delivering. But that's what we do. And so back then it was every couple days. That was freaky fast back then. And so, as technology has changed and as our expectations of our customers has changed, we've had to change, but we don't change the things that really matter, that service. Other questions? Yes?
What happened to Lewis Motor Supply?
Lewis Motor Supply, so they opened in Waterloo, and they made it all the way to the 80s and finally sold off in the 80s, I think, to either Napa or CarQuest, and I don't remember which. Some of you may be familiar with a guy named Jason Lewis, who was a radio personality. When Rush Limbaugh got sick, Jason Lewis took over his show for a while. That's B.J. Lewis's grandson. So his family was in Lewis Motor Supply for roughly 50 years in Waterloo. That's a good question. Anything else? I mean, I can talk about Arnold Motor Supply for days, so. Yeah.
Did EP have a car or something he went along the road with parts?
So, yep, when EP started, he had the 27 Chevy. So, and the interesting story about the 27 Chevy, and some of you who have been around a while might know a little more about this than me. We found a 28 Chevy out in Nebraska in 1977. So the 50th anniversary of the company was 1977. We presented a replica of the 27 Chevy to Mr. Arnold, complete with a wooden box in the back that worked just like. So the guys who were building it were trying to covertly ask him about, hey, tell me, how did you build that wooden box in the back of the 27 Chevy? Describe it, just trying to not give it away so they could pick his brain, so they could replicate it, so they could give him the car back. And we still have that car today. It drives in the parades, and we take it to car shows, and our stores can come get it and use it. You have to be a midget to fit in it, but it still works. And so then Mr. Arnold had, from there, they went into a box truck. We are in the process of trying to find one, a 1938 Dodge box truck that we can have restored and repainted to replicate what we did in the 30s. And we have a lot of pictures. I didn't put one in this slide, but we're working on that right now so that we can use it as part of our centennial, which, believe it or not, is coming up in 3 years. Mr. Arnold himself was famous for owning and driving white Cadillacs. So he always had a white Cadillac every year. And one year he could not find a white one, so he bought a different one and had it painted white. So every company vehicle today is still white. Any other questions? All right.
Thank you, Eric. We are so very happy and pleased that you did this and you're keeping the tradition that EP Arnold started so long ago thriving as the headquarters here in Spencer. We're so grateful for that. And just a reminder, Tim Steffen will be speaking on the history of aviation in Spencer on Thursday at 5:30 right here. You can also watch it live on our City of Spencer Facebook. Can we please have a big round for Eric? Thank you for sharing your knowledge. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Have a great night.